So if we want to facilitate reflection in our classes, and if we want to encourage our students to take on the role of meaning makers, we need to do our work. And one of the things we need to do is to learn the art of formulating an insight. An insight, after all, is the goal of reflection. This is where understanding happens. If we don't know what an insight is, and if we don't formulate an insight correctly, I think the process of reflection that we want to happen in class may just not happen. So what is an insight? What criteria can we use when we're trying to formulate an effective insight? And I would like to propose that the same set of criteria can be used in evaluating insights. So first, an insight is not a definition. It's not just a fact. Second, it's not an opinion. It's not just a personal opinion or subjective feeling. Rather, an insight is a judgment. It's an assertion or theory. It may not be 100% decidable, but it's defensible to a certain extent. And for this reason, it's really fertile ground for reflection. What do we mean by it's not a definition? When we say that an insight is not just a definition, we're saying that it should be debatable. And this is the first criterion for formulating and evaluating insights. It should be debatable, meaning it should provoke thought and talk. It should be interesting and even controversial if possible. It should make you think and ask questions. It should have no single or correct answer. It should not have an obvious or self-evident solution, because otherwise it would be a fact or definition. And you don't really think or reflect about a fact or definition because it's already obvious. No thought or talk is really provoked when it's just a fact that we're talking about. But when it's debatable, that's when an insight encourages reflection and discussion. So the first criterion is that your insight, your formulation of an insight, should be debatable to a certain extent. Secondly, not only is it not a definition, it should not be an opinion. It should not be a personal opinion that's random, that's arbitrary. It should be defensible. It should call for critical thinking and evaluation. So it's neither fact nor opinion. It's a claim or assertion, and this claim or assertion is based on one's content knowledge and skills. In short, a student having gone through a topic or a unit is able to formulate some kind of statement, a thesis, a judgment that can be evaluated and that can lead to substantial discussion. Now, if you have only a fact or a definition, no one's really going to discuss that. No one needs to discuss that. It's already accepted, and there's no real need to evaluate it unless it's controversial. No? So a fact or definition does not need to be defended. Whereas if it's an opinion, it's not possible to defend it because it's arbitrary and it's random. So the second criterion for formulating and evaluating insights is that it must be defensible. The third, and this is very important, is that the insight should be deep diveable. What do we mean by deep diveable? It means it should invite further reflection and understanding. Just like an iceberg, it should invite you to dive deeper into the matter. First of all, it should be essential and central to the topic and the unit. It should be at the heart of the matter. It should be at the core of the discipline. The insight should make connections and organize the content knowledge so that there's a bigger picture that emerges, which will allow access to all the knowledge in the future. So here are the 3 Ds or 3 criteria for formulating insights and evaluating insights. It must be debatable, defensible, and deep diveable. Now let's go back to Churchill's quotation. History is written by the victors. This can be a proposed insight for a lesson in history or several lessons in history. Do you think this insight, this formulation, is debatable, defensible, or deep diveable? Think about it. I hope you had a chance to mull over the question whether Churchill's quotation is debatable, defensible, and deep diveable, whether this insight, this proposed insight, meets the 3 criteria that we've set for an insight for reflection. Well, I would say that it's certainly debatable. It is not a self-evident fact that history is always written by the victors. It is defensible. It is not just a personal opinion. We could actually cite examples from history to agree or disagree with the claim of Churchill. And third, it's deep diveable because it's an intriguing statement. It makes you wonder, is it really true that every historical account is written by the victors, by the winning party? It invites you to dive deeper into history, to learn more in history. So for these reasons, I would say that Churchill's quotation, this proposed insight for history, would meet the three criteria that we've set for formulating and evaluating insights. It's debatable, defensible, and deep diveable. Here's a question for you. I have here two statements, and one of them is an insight. Which one for you sounds like an insight? This example is from literature. So the first statement goes, the plot refers to the sequence of events in a narrative, usually consisting of 1. The exposition of the situation, 2. The rising action as a result of conflict, 3. The climax or turning point, 4. The falling action, and 5. The resolution. The second statement, every single element in a given literary text, such as a narrative, poem, or essay, ought to contribute to the author's purpose, be it a message or an artistic, emotional effect. Think about it. Which one sounds like an insight? If you pick the second statement, the statement in yellow, then you're correct. Because the first statement, even if it's lengthy and contains a number of literary jargon, is really just a definition. And because it's a definition, it's not really debatable. It doesn't need to be defensible. It doesn't need to be defended. And it may be deep diveable. It may pique your curiosity about the elements of a story or a narrative, but it doesn't meet the other first two criteria. Whereas if you compare it to the second statement, every single element in a given literary text, such as a narrative, poem, or essay, ought to contribute to the author's purpose, be it a message or an artistic emotional effect, that's debatable. That's not a definition. It's also not just an opinion, because you could actually cite examples and support your claim for it or your disagreement with it. No? And I think it's certainly deep diveable. It intrigues you. It makes you wonder, is this really true in every case, in any given literary text? So the second statement would qualify as a proper insight. Now here's another question. This time these are statements or proposed insights for science. Which of the following is an insight? First, the heart is a muscular organ that pumps the blood through the circulatory system by rhythmic contraction and dilation. Second, the heart is my favorite organ. And third, the heart shows that in nature, design follows function. What do you think? Okay, let's go through each one of them. The first statement is a definition. It's very long, but it's just a definition. The second statement is obviously just an opinion. There's no point reflecting about that or arguing about that. It's a third statement that qualifies as an insight. Namely, the heart shows that in nature, design follows function. Again, it's debatable. It's not a self-evident fact. Secondly, it's not just an opinion. It can be defended. You can look at examples in nature. Aside from the human heart, we can look for other examples in nature to support or to disagree with his claim that in nature, design follows function. And the third is that it's quite essential and central. It's a synthesis statement, and it invites a deeper dive into the matter. So it's the third statement that qualifies as an insight given our three criteria of being debatable, defensible, and deep diveable. Here's another question. Which of the following statements is not an insight? There are 4 statements here from 3 different disciplines, and they're being proposed as an insight. I'd like you to examine them. The first one is from literature. A, poetry uses language purposefully, choosing words and forms that enhance meaning and impact through their sound and rhythm. B, this one's from physical education. In sports, good technique can sometimes compensate for a lack of strength or size. C, from science, evolution is change in the heritable characteristics of biological populations over successive generations. D, also from science, science is a process of piecing together all the available and disparate evidences and formulating a tentative explanation for them. Or E, all qualify as insights. In short, none of the above is not an insight. What do you think? Okay, let's analyze each of these statements. The first one, poetry uses language purposefully, choosing words and forms that enhance meaning and impact through their sounds and rhythm. That's not a fact. It's a claim, it's a judgment, and therefore it's debatable, it's also defensible, and it's deep diveable. So I would say that A is clearly an insight. It qualifies as an insight. What about letter B? In sports, good technique can sometimes compensate for a lack of strength or size. Well, again, I don't think this is self-evident. This is not a definition or a fact. Neither is it just an opinion. I think we can actually support it or disagree with it. So I would also say that this is an insight. Let's go to letter C. Evolution is change in the heritable characteristics of biological populations over successive generations. Well, again, it's full of jargon, but it's not an insight. It's actually the definition of evolution. So this would not qualify as an insight. Compare the statement to the next statement, which is also from science. Science is a process of piecing together all the available and disparate evidences and formulating a tentative explanation for them. I would say that even if most of us will agree with this is not a self-evident fact. So this would also be an insight. So the correct answer is letter C. How many of you got that? So here are a few more things about insights, which I hope will help us learn how to formulate insights as well as how to evaluate them. Insights are best formulated as a thesis statement. It should be provocative and it should invite questions and qualifications. Here's another example from language. Writing is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. That sounds like a thesis statement. It's quite catchy, yes, but it's provocative and it invites questions and qualifications. Is writing really just 1% inspiration? Is writing really 99% perspiration? I think those of us who are writing our thesis or dissertation will certainly agree with this particular insight. Insights are best worded in an age-appropriate manner, accessible for the intended learners. Now, this is an important guideline for formulating an insight. We don't want the insight to sound so profound, but it's not accessible to the learners. So, for example, in a history class, let's say for the lower grades, we can say something like this. We can learn from the past to make the future better. Very simple. It tells you the purpose of studying history. It's not a self-evident fact. It's not an obvious fact, but it's debatable. Is it really true that we can learn from the past to make our future better? So why does the present look like the way it does today? That's something to reflect and discuss about. No? The point here is that the formulation is age appropriate. Compare this statement to the next statement, which is about a similar insight. Not only can events in history shed light on the present, but the present can also help us understand the past. Well, first of all, what this insight is saying is much more profound and much more complicated than the first one, which was worded in an age-appropriate way. But this one is really aimed at students in the higher grade levels. No? So this time there's a greater nuancing in the insight. No? So insights recur in one's education, and they deepen and grow in complexity and sophistication. So this is a great example because earlier in the lower grades, you say you can learn from your past to make your future better. But now in a related way, but in a more complex and sophisticated formulation, you're saying that events in history can shed light on the present, can help us prepare for a better future. But at the same time, the present can also help us understand the past better. So you can see that insights are evolving as well. Insights are best considered a work in progress. This is an important thing to remember when we're trying our hand at formulating insights because sometimes we're too hard on ourselves. We're not happy with our formulation and we give up. No, insights are a work in progress. The formulation that we come up with in preparation for our classes, they are actually works in progress. They are tentative. They are never final or definitive. We need to work with other teachers and even our students to revise our formulations and to improve our formulations. Sometimes our students come up with better insights and we can actually use them. I want to stop here for a while and ask you to just recall what we've talked about and think of an example of an insight. Maybe it's an insight for a class that you're taking or a class that you're teaching now. Just think of an insight. Remember the 3Ds, the three criteria. First, it has to be debatable. It should not be a self-evident fact or definition. Secondly, it should be defensible. It should not just be a subjective feeling or opinion. And third, ideally, it should be deep diveable. It should invite further learning. It should invite further questioning and further reflection. So let's take a pause here and just think about a possible example of an insight. And maybe we can share what our insights are.